Hello, my name is Daniel Ömer Livarchin, and I'm a management consultant specialized in the nonprofit sector. I have over 25 years of professional experience. I'm a retired Navy captain. I worked in the government, I worked in the private sector, and for the last several years, I have been consulting nonprofit organizations, charities, social enterprises, and nonprofit organizations and associations. And I'm also a researcher. I'm a part-time professor at the University of Ottawa, and I try to develop some practical scientific solutions for the nonprofit organizations. So I spent a lot of time in observing and researching the management practices in the nonprofit domain. And so far, I learned a couple of practical things, and I want to share one of them with you today. There are over 10 million nonprofit organizations globally. That's a big number, but it also means that there's a huge need for that organizations. So governments are great, private sector is great, but we also need some organizations to do some tasks that are not done by the government or by the private sector. So we need nonprofit organizations, and it's good to have them. Some of them are small, some of them are bigger. They have some sort of classical problems like funding diversification and fund development, or increasing their impact, or showcasing their impact, making their services and their activities visible to the society. So those are some of the common challenges. Another challenge that I want to talk about today is about the management structure in nonprofit organizations. Especially in smaller ones, it's really confusing. Who is the board member? What are their roles? And what is the role of executive director, right? So, and in Canada, over 70% of the nonprofit organizations have less than 3 employees. So it means that the current employees have to do lots of overlapping tasks, right? So they are fund developer, they are social media marketers, they are administrators, they are managerial accountants. In most of the cases, they are everything to their organization. But we need to make that distinction. So categorization of management roles in a nonprofit organization is important, not to get confused and increase the efficiency of the organization. So based on my experience, there are 3 categories. We can also consider them as layers, but not necessarily. So the first category is administration. Administration of the nonprofit organization. And the second category is the operations management of the nonprofit organization. And the third level, or third category, is the governance of the nonprofit organization. So those management practices can all be done by the same people, but it doesn't change the fact that they are different and they should be treated differently. In big organizations, established organizations, everybody has clear job description. Even the volunteers, they know what their tasks are and how they contribute to the organization. But for the majority of nonprofit organizations, this is not the case. So it's important to understand the distinction. So administration is basically making sure that the organizational infrastructure is ready for the operations. And this infrastructure is not necessarily the physical infrastructure, but also the organizational infrastructure. If we think nonprofit organization as a car, so making sure that the car has gas, the battery is ready, everything is in place, and the safety regulations are in place, is basically the administration of the car. And driving of the car is also administration. The second one, operations management, basically providing the services. Okay, so the administrator is the one who drives the car, and operations are the travelers who are in the car, who we are serving. So if you are transferring someone, if you are supporting someone, then it's part of your operations. Doing its delivery service. I know the terminology is not the same, but to make it easier, I prefer to use those categories: administration, operations, and the governance. The governance is usually at the strategic level. It's more about stakeholder engagement or strategic level decisions in the organization. Make sure that the organization is on the right track. It has a clear understanding about where they are today, where they want to be in the future. They are aware of their positive and negative risks, and they know where they are headed to. So the governance is responsible to make sure that the car, in our example, in our metaphor, knows where it is headed to, okay? But the governance is not the driver. Governance is not the person who takes care of the car. It's the person that leads the car. So the governance it comes to our mind that the board members are part of the governance, right? So it's so obvious. But who else is part of the governance? Executive director? Definitely yes. And occasionally the management team can be part of the governance. Even the employees or volunteers or some key stakeholders can be part of the governance structure. But those are temporary roles. The permanent ones are the board members and the executive director. For the operations, executive director is the driver, right? And the staff, the management team, and the volunteers are part of operations, but they are not part of administration. So administration and operations are two different things. And the decision makers, the managers, and the staff and the volunteers should be aware of this distinction and not get confused and avoid any overlaps. If you are working in a nonprofit organization that has enough human resources, you may have a dedicated administrator, right? Which is great, and you have this clear distinction. So administrator or program administrator, they use different terms, but basically it's the administration. So she is responsible for the administration of the organization, but she has no responsibility in the delivery of the services. Executive director is the head of administration and the operations. But he is using two different hats, right? So actually three. Administration hat is different than the operations hat, and the operations hat is different than the governance hat. It's important to understand that distinction and exercise it, because I have seen in many organizations, especially small ones, getting confused with the roles and responsibilities and defining some job descriptions. I have seen some volunteers who has influence on the administration and the operations of the organization. So I hope you will find this helpful. Sometimes simple rules can be very useful to solve complex problems. Enjoy your day.